Hi everyone, and now for your aviation weather forecast issued Thursday, August 29th. Starting out with our flying weather Friday morning, we have some IFR off the North Slope coastline, a little bit in northwestern Alaska, otherwise marginal VFR across the North Slope and down to the Seward Peninsula, down through the Bering Strait for marginal VFR, and off the west coast. Also extensive IFR over the Bering Sea, almost to the Pribilofs, and a little bit in the Dutch Harbor area. And then as we get over to South Central to take a look, most of South Central is forecasted to be marginal VFR with a little bit around the Anchorage area of VFR. IFR and mountain obscuration over the mountains of the Panhandle and a little bit up to and including the North Gulf Coast as well. And then for Friday afternoon, the Panhandle remains marginal VFR with some IFR moving in offshore on the Gulf. Marginal VFR for much of South Central, but a little bit in the Susitna Valley VFR. Also, I want to mention that there could be some oceanic thunderstorms south of the Kodiak Island. Marginal VFR down there. As we go out the Alaska Peninsula, mostly marginal VFR. St. Matthews got a little bit of IFR as well as the far western Aleutians. Also IFR offshore, but just about up to Utiagavik, but along the North Slope, generally marginal VFR as you get further inland and for the Brooks Range, and much of the central and interior VFR flying. Then for Saturday morning, the IFR moves in along the North Slope for the Utiagavik area and on up to the Brooks Range. Marginal VFR elsewhere in the north, including Kotzebue Sound and the Seward Peninsula. Marginal VFR for much of the Bering Sea, IFR for the Pribilofs, parts of the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians, IFR for the far western Aleutians. Also, again, mentioning those oceanic thunderstorms off of Kodiak Island, a good possibility there. And then marginal VFR on the west side of Cook Inlet over to Prince William Sound, including the Yakutat area, and then lots of IFR for the Panhandle as all of that rain moves in. And then for Saturday afternoon, IFR continues for much of the Panhandle, marginal VFR offshore and over into South Central. The oceanic thunderstorms, the area of the greatest risk will be off of Cape Suckling and a little bit off the North Gulf Coast, so we'll be watching that if you're doing any trans-Gulf flights. And then the IFR again has moved into the Dutch Harbor area and up to the Alaska Peninsula with marginal VFR elsewhere, and then marginal VFR off the coast of the North Slope. Also, the Alaska Range is marginal VFR as well as into the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains and for Prince William Sound. So looking at our past conditions, starting out for Friday, Anaktuvik, marginal VFR becoming VFR. Same thing for Adigan Pass, marginal VFR becoming VFR. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, marginal VFR, and the area of turbulence is almost right up to the southern edge of that. So I thought I'd mention that for Lake Clark and Merrill if you're flight planning for that area. We'll have another look at it. Be sure and get a pilot weather briefing and see if that turbulence area has actually migrated northward into that pass area. Then also for Rainy Pass, marginal VFR. Windy Pass, marginal VFR becoming VFR. Isabel Pass, marginal VFR becoming VFR. Mentasta Pass, VFR, but marginal VFR along the southern edges of that pass. Then for Tahitna Pass, marginal VFR and some turbulence expected in the afternoon. Portage Pass, marginal VFR, and again turbulence in the afternoon. And Chilkoot and White Pass, starting out as IFR, becoming marginal VFR. For our freezing levels on Friday morning, the coldest air up along the North Slope and the Brooks Range, some surface areas, and then it ramps up to about 4,000 to 6,000 feet as you get over the southern two-thirds of the mainland portion of Alaska, and also for the northern Panhandle. rising up to 8,000 feet as you get down to Dixon Entrance, and also for the central and western Aleutians. So that sets up our icing forecast for Friday. First of all, keeping an eye on the possibility of those thunderstorms south of Kodiak Island out over the ocean. And then the considerable moderate area includes Kodiak Island, eastern part of the Kenai Peninsula, as well as Prince William Sound, and just about over to Yakutat as well. Again, that altitude will be about 6,000 to about 14,000 feet, depending exactly where the freezing level is. And then for southeast Alaska, a large area of isolated moderate, and then an area of considerable moderate in the southern panhandle, and that'll be from the freezing level to flight level 180. So that's it for the icing forecast. Let's look at the jet stream. So we've got a 120 knot jet, and it's really aimed at southeast Alaska. The upper level low just south of Kodiak Island, and then really you have to go pretty far out in the Bering Sea to get into some northerlies, about 65, and then that second band in the far western Aleutians all the way up to about 85 knots. A few westerlies over the central interior, 25 to about 50 knots or so, but the main story is the jet aimed at the panhandle. The same thing with about the 9,000 foot winds, of course a little bit less in the magnitude and wind speed, but up to about 60 knots flowing into southeast Alaska, circulation around that low, and then some northerlies out in the Aleutians, maybe up to about 40, 50 knots or so, but then you have to go pretty far north to get into the westerlies that's behind that system that has kicked out into northwestern Canada. Now for our 3,000 foot winds, again, that circulation south of Kodiak Island there, around 45 knots in the southern sections going across the Gulf. But notice those easterlies that are now flowing up to the Kenai Peninsula into Prince William Sound, and that's really our source of turbulence, because when it hits that terrain, that's when you really get those upward and downward motion in the winds. And then for southern southeast Alaska, we've got westerlies showing up at about all the way up to about 40 knots or so. So that sets our turbulence forecast. First of our areas of considerable moderate, forecasting for Prince William Sound and the eastern Kenai Peninsula surface to about 6,000 feet or so. For the Kodiak Island area, Shelikof Strait and the northern Alaska Peninsula, again, that area is about surface to 6,000 feet for some considerable moderate turbulence in that flow around that low that's in the Gulf. And then finally, due to the westerly winds, surface to about 4,000 feet in the Dutch Harbor area for considerable moderate. So folks, be sure and file a flight plan and fly safe out there.